The late afternoon sun cast long, languid shadows across the manicured lawn, each blade of grass a perfect emerald spear. From his seat on the stone bench, nestled within the fragrant embrace of a climbing rose trellis, Liam Thorne watched the light dance on the surface of the koi pond. He had designed this garden for his wife, Laura, an oasis of calm in the sprawling, opulent grounds of her parents' estate. It was meant to be their sanctuary, a quiet corner away from the suffocating grandeur of the main house. But there was no peace to be found here today. Not anymore. He wasn't meant to hear it. The breeze was supposed to carry their voices away, a gentle murmur of mother-daughter conspiracy lost to the rustle of leaves. But a sudden lull, a breath held by the world, delivered the words to him with chilling clarity. They came from the veranda, where Laura stood with her mother, Eleanor, their figures silhouetted against the grand French doors. Eleanor's voice was a low, conspiratorial hum, but it was Laura's response that sliced through the tranquil air and lodged itself like a shard of ice in Liam's heart. "Don't worry, Mother," Laura had whispered, a sound both sweet and venomous. "Just a little more patience. His money will be mine soon." The world didn't shatter, the birds didn't stop singing, the sun didn't fall from the sky. The only thing that broke was the delicate, intricate structure of the life Liam believed he was building. It was a structure he had designed with the same care and precision he brought to his architectural work. A foundation of love, walls of trust, a roof of shared dreams. In a single, whispered sentence, his wife had revealed it all to be a facade, a hollow shell he had mistaken for a home. He sat perfectly still, his hands resting on his knees. He had thought their life was a collaboration. He didn't know it was a demolition project, and he was the building being torn down. Within a few short months, the life they had known would be nothing but rubble, and he would be the one holding the detonation codes. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me for this story. I truly appreciate you spending your time here. If you enjoy stories about quiet strength and seeing arrogance meet its match, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. I'd also love to know where you're watching from today. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. Now, let's get back to Liam and the moment his world was turned upside down. The initial shock was a physical thing, a cold wave that started in his chest and radiated outwards, leaving his limbs feeling heavy and distant. He looked down at his hands, half expecting them to be trembling, but they were rock steady. An architect's hands. Hands that sketched dreams into existence, that understood stress points in load-bearing walls. He had always been a man of structure, of logic. He processed the emotional cataclysm with the same methodical calm he would use to analyze a building's failing foundation. The input, Laura's whisper. The data, a confession of intent, a revelation of profound betrayal. The context, 5 years of marriage, a union that had always felt slightly off balance. Liam was a man of quiet accomplishment, an architect at a respectable, if not flashy, firm. He made a good living, enough for their comfortable house in a pleasant suburb, enough for nice vacations and the occasional luxury. He had believed it was enough for Laura. He now understood it was merely a placeholder, an investment she was waiting to cash in. Her family, the Prestons, had never let him forget the disparity. Richard Preston was a titan of real estate development, a man who built empires of glass and steel and measured a man's worth by the height of his skyscrapers and the depth of his bank accounts. His wife, Eleanor, curated their social standing with the ferocity of a museum director guarding priceless artifacts. Their son, Marcus, was a weak echo of his father, possessing all of Richard's arrogance, but none of his acumen. To them, Liam was a curiosity, a bafflingly modest choice for their beautiful, ambitious Laura. Their condescension wasn't overt, not usually. It was in the casual dismissal of his work, the faint, pitying smiles, the way Richard would clap him on the shoulder and call him a good, steady fellow, the words dripping with the unspoken addendum, and nothing more. He had tolerated it for Laura's sake. He had believed her when she said she loved him for who he was, not what he had. He thought her occasional silences during her family's casual dismissals were a sign of discomfort, not complicity. Now he saw it all with a brutal new clarity. Her silence was not a shield, it was an endorsement. Every patronizing comment she had allowed to pass, every subtle jab she had failed to counter, was a small betrayal leading to this grand one. He felt a strange calm settle over him. The pain was still there, a deep, resonant ache, but it was being overlaid by something else, a cold, clear sense of purpose. He was an architect, a builder. He knew that when a foundation is compromised beyond repair, you don't patch it. You don't prop it up and hope for the best. You bring it down. Deliberately, methodically. You clear the site to make way for something new, something stronger, something built on truth. He looked across the lawn at the two women, now laughing about something, their heads close together. They were so confident, so secure in their shared belief of his naivety. They saw him as a simple blueprint, easily read and easily discarded. They had no idea about the hidden schematics, the secret rooms, the fortified vaults of a life he had kept completely, meticulously separate from this one. Laura thought she was waiting to inherit a modest nest egg. She had no idea she was married to the dragon sleeping on the mountain of gold she and her father so desperately coveted. He stood up, his movements fluid and unhurried. He brushed a non-existent speck of dust from his trousers. The architect in him was already at work, not with brick and mortar, but with finance and law and the undeniable physics of consequence. The demolition had begun, not with a bang, but with a whisper, and he would finish it. The Sunday dinner at the Preston estate was a weekly ritual, a command performance Liam had come to dread. The dining room was a monument to Richard Preston's ego. A long, polished mahogany table reflected the glittering chandelier above, a fixture so large and ostentatious it seemed to suck the very air out of the room. The walls were covered in dark, somber oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors, their gazes a constant, silent judgment. Liam sat in his usual spot, to Eleanor's left, a position that was neither at the head nor the foot of the table, but stranded in a kind of social no-man's land. Laura sat opposite him, radiant in a silk dress the color of champagne. She smiled at him, a warm, brilliant smile that, just 2 days ago, would have made his heart ache with love. Tonight, it was just another part of the performance. He saw the calculation in her eyes, the subtle assessment. She was checking on her investment. "Liam!" Richard boomed from the head of the table, his voice a gravelly rumble that demanded attention. He was carving a roast with more force than was strictly necessary, a display of casual dominance. "Heard you landed the new community library. Small potatoes, I suppose, but good for the soul, eh?" Marcus, seated next to his father, snorted into his wineglass. "A library? How quaint. Dad's about to break ground on the Azure Pinnacle, and you're designing a place for old ladies to read romance novels." The Azure Pinnacle. It was Richard's magnum opus, a breathtakingly ambitious skyscraper planned for the city's burgeoning tech district. It was the talk of the town, a project that would cement the Preston legacy for generations. It was also a project mired in difficulties. The land acquisition was proving troublesome, and the design proposals Richard had received so far were, in his own words, uninspired garbage. Liam took a slow sip of water, his expression unreadable. "A library is a vital public space, Richard. It's a repository of knowledge, a place for the community to gather. There's a different kind of value in that." "Value that doesn't show up on a balance sheet," Richard retorted, slapping a thick slice of meat onto his plate. "You architects are all the same. So caught up in your vision, you forget what it's all about. Making a mark. Building something that scrapes the sky, not something that scrapes by on public funding." Liam felt the familiar sting of the dismissal, but tonight it landed differently. It wasn't a personal insult. It was a data point. Richard's entire worldview was built on scale and profit. He was blind to anything else. This blindness was not just a character flaw, it was a strategic vulnerability. Laura chimed in, her voice light and placating. "Dad, be nice. Liam works very hard. Not everyone can build skyscrapers." It was a defense designed to sound supportive while simultaneously reinforcing Liam's perceived lesser status. "He's trying his best, the poor dear." Eleanor, who had been silently observing the exchange, added her own delicate touch. "Of course, dear, it's a very noble profession. I'm sure the bookshelves will be lovely." The way she said bookshelves made it sound like an exotic and slightly pitiful hobby, like collecting bottle caps. Liam didn't respond. He simply met Laura's gaze across the table. He held it for a beat longer than was comfortable, a silent question in his eyes. "Is this what you want? Is this who you are?" For a flicker of a second, he saw something in her expression, a flash of guilt, of shame, before it was quickly papered over with a bright, brittle smile. She looked away first. It was all the confirmation he needed. She had made her choice. She had chosen this. The glittering chandelier, the judgmental portraits, the casual cruelty disguised as banter. She had chosen the promise of her father's world over the reality of hers with him. Later, as they were leaving, Richard clapped Liam on the shoulder, the gesture both friendly and condescending. "Listen, son, if that little library gig doesn't pan out, there's always a spot for you at Preston Development. We could use someone to oversee, I don't know, bathroom tile selections. Something in your wheelhouse." Marcus laughed openly. Laura just smiled and squeezed Liam's arm, a gesture of solidarity that felt utterly false. "That's very generous, Dad." As they drove home in Liam's respectable but modest sedan, a car Marcus had once asked if he'd won in a raffle, the silence in the car was heavy. Laura finally broke it. "Don't mind them," she said, not looking at him. "They just don't understand your work." "No," Liam said, his voice quiet but firm. "I think they understand it perfectly. They just don't value it." He glanced at her. "And neither do you." The accusation hung in the air between them. Laura stiffened. "That's not fair, Liam. You know I'm proud of you." "Are you?" he asked, the question genuine. He wanted to hear the lie, to analyze its construction. "Are you proud when your father offers me a job picking out tiles? Are you proud when your brother laughs at my car? Or are you just embarrassed?" "You're being too sensitive," she snapped, her voice sharp. The mask was slipping. "It's just how they are. You need to grow a thicker skin." "No," he thought, turning his attention back to the road. "You need to grow a conscience." He didn't say it. There was no point. He was past the point of arguments. He was in the planning phase now. That night, he didn't go to bed with Laura. He told her he had a deadline, an excuse she readily accepted, already scrolling through her phone, her mind a million miles away. He went down to his study, a room she rarely entered, calling it his cluttered little workspace. He closed the door and the world of the Prestons fell away. Here he was not good, steady Liam. He was himself. The room was minimalist and immaculate. On his desk, next to a state-of-the-art computer, sat a single, elegant fountain pen. It was a custom-made instrument, matte black with a silver nib, a gift to himself. He picked it up, the cool, weighted metal, a familiar comfort in his hand. He unlocked a drawer and pulled out a set of blueprints. Their sheer size and complexity a stark contrast to the simple library plans he kept on public display. He unrolled them across his desk. It was a design for a tower, a spiraling, breathtaking structure that seemed to defy gravity. It was organic, innovative, and utterly unique. At the bottom of the title block, where the architect's name would be, was a single, stylized symbol, a star, Orion. He picked up his phone and dialed a secure number. It was answered on the first ring. "Julian," Liam said, his voice losing its quiet domestic edge and taking on a tone of command. It's time. I want you to begin the process. Phase 1. There was a pause on the other end. Are you sure, Liam? Julian's voice was calm, professional. He was Liam's lawyer, his business partner, and one of only 2 people in the world who knew the full extent of his success. I'm sure, Liam said, his gaze fixed on the magnificent tower on his desk. The Azure Pinnacle. His design, his project, his land. They've made their choice. Now I'm making mine. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in duplicity. On the surface, Liam was the same man he had always been. He went to work, he came home, he endured the Prestons' company with a placid smile. But beneath the calm exterior, a tectonic shift was occurring. He was a man living 2 lives, and the wall between them was about to be demolished. His interactions with Laura became a strange, quiet dance. She, believing he was oblivious, grew bolder in her manipulations. Her affection became more pronounced, more theatrical. She would greet him at the door with a kiss, her eyes scanning his face for any sign of trouble, any hint that her prize might be slipping away. She started talking about the future with a new, avaricious gleam in her eye. I was looking at houses online today, she said one evening, snuggling up to him on the sofa. She held up her tablet, displaying a sprawling modern mansion with an infinity pool overlooking a canyon. Isn't this divine? One day, Liam, when your ship comes in. He looked at the image. It was cold, impersonal, all glass and sharp angles. It was a house designed to impress, not to be lived in. It's big, he said, his tone non-committal. It's a statement, she corrected. Imagine the parties we could throw. Dad would be so impressed. There it is, he thought, the motivation, laid bare. It was never about them. It was about her father. She began asking subtle, probing questions about his finances. My friend's husband just got a huge inheritance, she'd say casually. It's amazing how that can change everything, isn't it? Or, did your parents leave you much, darling? You never really talk about it. His parents, both humble school teachers, had left him their modest home and a profound belief in the power of knowledge and integrity. They had also, unbeknownst to anyone but him and Julian, left him a portfolio of early tech stocks, purchased on a whim in the 80s, that had blossomed into a staggering fortune. Liam had taken that seed money and, with his own quiet genius for design and investment, cultivated it into an empire. He had founded an anonymous architectural firm, Orion Design, which quickly became the most sought-after name in cutting-edge architecture, all while he maintained his cover as a mid-level drone at a conventional firm. He enjoyed the anonymity, the freedom to create without the burden of ego or fame. He thought he was protecting his life with Laura from the corrupting influence of extreme wealth. He realized now he had only been protecting the wealth from her. He played along with her inquiries, feigning a simple-mindedness she was all too eager to believe. My parents were teachers, honey. Their legacy was in their students, not their stocks, he'd say, a statement that was both true and a masterful evasion. She would pat his hand, a flicker of disappointment in her eyes before it was replaced by a look of patient resolve. She could wait. Meanwhile, the real work was happening in the quiet hours of the night. In his hidden study, Liam was not just an architect, he was a general, marshaling his forces. On calls with Julian, they executed a precise and ruthless strategy. The joint accounts have been partitioned, Julian reported one night. All liquid assets have been transferred to the new holding company, shielded by 3 layers of corporate structuring. The house is next. Since you purchased it outright before the marriage, her name is on the deed as a courtesy, not a right of ownership. We can rectify that with a simple filing. Good, Liam said, looking at the schematics for the Azure Pinnacle. And the land for the tower? Still securely in the name of the Shell Corporation. Richard Preston has no idea he's been trying to negotiate with a subsidiary of a company owned by his own son-in-law. His latest offer is insultingly low, by the way. He's trying to bully the anonymous owner. Liam felt a grim smile touch his lips. Let him. His arrogance is his undoing. What about his firm, Preston Development? Vulnerable, Julian said. He's over-leveraged on the promise of the Azure Pinnacle. He's taken out massive loans, banking on the project's success. If it falls through, he'll be facing a liquidity crisis he can't recover from. His creditors are getting nervous. The trap was elegant in its simplicity. It was a structure built not of steel and concrete, but of Richard's own greed and pride. He had walked into it willingly, blinded by his own ambition. The final piece of the puzzle was a charity gala hosted by the Prestons. It was the social event of the season, a night for Eleanor to shine and for Richard to hold court. Liam stood by Laura's side, a handsome, silent accessory in a well-fitted tuxedo. Richard was in his element, a booming, expansive presence. He cornered Liam by the champagne fountain. "Liam, just the man, I'm this close," he said, holding his thumb and forefinger a millimeter apart, to landing Orion. "Oh," Liam said, taking a flute of champagne from a passing waiter. "Yes, the mysterious boy genius, hiding behind his lawyers and shell companies, thinks he can play hardball with me." Richard let out a short, barking laugh. "He has no idea who he's dealing with. I'll have him, and I'll have him on my terms. This Azure Pinnacle will be my masterpiece." He gestured vaguely at Liam. "You should stick to your library, son. The big leagues are a rough place." He winked and strode off to glad hand a city councilman, leaving Liam standing alone. Laura materialized at his side, her eyes shining with excitement. "Did you hear that? Dad is going to get Orion. Isn't it thrilling?" she gushed. "This is going to be huge for us." "For us." The words echoed in the space between them. "It certainly will be," Liam said, his voice a low murmur. He looked at her, truly looked at her, at the woman he had loved, the woman who had so thoroughly and completely betrayed him for the promise of a life like this, a life of glittering surfaces and hollow cores. He felt a profound sense of loss, not for the woman she was, but for the woman he had once believed her to be. He took a final sip of his champagne. The quiet before the storm was over. It was time to make it rain. The call was made the following Monday. Liam used a tone he had rarely used with Laura, a tone of quiet, unassailable authority. "Laura, I need you to arrange something. I want your father, your mother, and Marcus to come to our house on Saturday afternoon. There's something important we all need to discuss." There was a pause on her end. "Our house? Is everything okay, Liam? You sound strange." "Everything is fine," he said, the words technically true. "Things were about to be put right. Just tell them it's about our future. It's important they all be there." The phrase, "our future," was the perfect bait. He could almost hear the gears turning in her mind. This was it, the moment she'd been waiting for. Perhaps he'd received a small inheritance after all. Perhaps he was finally going to humble himself and ask Richard for a job. A move that would put him firmly under the Preston thumb and his assets within their sphere of influence. "Of course, darling," she said, her voice now laced with excitement. "I'll make sure they're there. 2 o'clock? 2 o'clock is perfect," he said, and hung up. The days leading up to Saturday were filled with a palpable tension. Laura was practically vibrating with anticipation, treating Liam with a cloying, solicitous affection that set his teeth on edge. She talked about redecorating, about travel, about all the things they would do with their newfound freedom. She was spending money that wasn't yet hers on a future that would never happen. Liam, meanwhile, moved through the days with a serene focus. He was an architect preparing for the final presentation to a client, every detail checked, every contingency planned for. He met with Julian one last time, signing a stack of documents with his matte black fountain pen. Each signature was a precise, deliberate stroke, another steel beam swinging into place in the structure of his new life. Saturday arrived, a crisp, clear autumn day. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. Liam prepared the living room not as a host, but as a stage manager. He arranged the seating carefully, a single, comfortable armchair for himself, facing the sofa and two accompanying chairs. It wasn't a throne, but it was a position of control. On the coffee table, he placed a single, slim, leather portfolio. At precisely 2 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Laura, dressed in an expensive cashmere sweater set, rushed to open it. "They're here," she trilled, as if announcing the arrival of royalty. The Prestons swept in, filling the modest home with their oversized presence. Richard, in a tailored blazer, surveyed the room with a look of faint disdain. Eleanor, draped in pearls, avoided letting her designer coat touch any of the furniture. Marcus swaggered in behind them, already looking bored. "Liam," Richard began, foregoing any pleasantries. "Laura said you had something important to discuss. I hope this won't take long. I have a tea time at 4. "It will take exactly as long as it needs to," Liam said, his voice calm and even. He gestured to the sofa. "Please, sit down." They arranged themselves on the sofa, a united front of arrogance and expectation. Laura perched on the arm of the chair next to her mother, her eyes fixed on Liam, a greedy, encouraging smile on her face. She looked like a spectator at a gladiatorial match, eager for the blood to be spilled, certain her champion would be victorious. Liam sat down in the armchair, the leather sighing under his weight. He let the silence stretch, a deliberate, calculated pause. He watched them, their impatience growing, their confidence unwavering. They looked at him and saw a mild-mannered supplicant, a man about to ask for a favor. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice filling the quiet room. "I asked you here because it's time for some clarity. About our future, as I told Laura, but perhaps not in the way you're expecting." Richard shifted impatiently. "Get to the point, son. What is this about? Do you need a loan? Is that it?" "No, Richard, I don't need a loan," Liam said. He leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped in front of him. "This is about truth. For 5 years I have been a member of this family, and in that time I have been subjected to a constant, unending stream of condescension, dismissal, and disrespect." The mood in the room shifted. The smug expectation began to curdle into confusion and annoyance. "Now hold on a minute," Richard blustered. "No, you will listen," Liam said, and the sheer, quiet force in his voice silenced Richard. "I am not finished." He turned his gaze to Eleanor. "Eleanor, you have never once asked me a single genuine question about my life or my work. You have treated me as a social liability, a stain on your perfect family portrait. The way you speak of my profession, as if it were a quaint but unfortunate hobby, has been noted." Eleanor's perfectly made-up face tightened, her mouth a thin, disapproving line. He looked at Marcus. "Marcus, your contributions have been less subtle. The jokes about my car, my home, my income, the open contempt. You are a pale imitation of your father's worst qualities, a bully without an ounce of his drive." Marcus's face flushed a deep, angry red. "Who the hell do you think you are?" "I'm the man who is tired of being your punchline," Liam replied coolly, before his gaze settled on Richard. "And you, Richard, you with your grand pronouncements and your patronizing advice. You see the world only through the lens of profit and scale. You measure everyone against yourself and find them wanting. You offered me a job selecting bathroom tiles, believing it was the height of my potential." Finally, he looked at his wife. Laura's smile had vanished, replaced by a look of dawning horror. She was starting to realize this was not the conversation she had anticipated. "And you, Laura," he said, his voice dropping, becoming softer, more devastating. "You stood by and watched it all. You enabled it. You endorsed it with your silence. You chose their approval over your husband's dignity, time and time again." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the suffocatingly quiet room. The air was thick with their shock and indignation. This was not how things were supposed to go. The sheep was not supposed to have teeth. But all of that, Liam continued, his voice still quiet, all of that is merely the foundation. The real issue, the reason we are here today, is what I overheard you say to your mother in the garden last month. He locked his eyes on Laura, and for the first time she saw the man he truly was. Not the gentle, accommodating husband, but someone ancient and formidable. A judge whose verdict was about to be delivered. He quoted her words back to her, slowly, precisely. You said, "Don't worry, mother, just a little more patience. His money will be mine soon." The words landed in the center of the room like a grenade. Laura's face went completely white. The color drained from her cheeks as if pulled by a string. A small, strangled gasp escaped her lips. Eleanor looked at her daughter, her expression one of pure shock, not at the sentiment, but at the fact that it had been discovered. Richard stared, his mouth slightly agape. For the first time since Liam had known him, the man was speechless. He was trying to process the audacity, the sheer impossibility of what was happening. His mild-mannered doormat of a son-in-law was not just talking back. He was systematically dismantling them. Laura stammered, her eyes darting between Liam and her parents, seeking an escape route that did not exist. Liam, you misunderstood. That's not what I meant. I was talking about our joint savings, for the future, for us. The lie was flimsy, pathetic. It dissolved in the face of his cold, unwavering stare. Was it, Laura? Liam asked, his voice devoid of heat, full of a chilling finality. Were you talking about us, when you and your mother have spent the last year speculating about a non-existent terminal illness I might have? When you've researched divorce settlements in this state, looking for loopholes regarding premarital assets? Did you think I didn't notice the browser history you so carefully tried to delete? This was the second grenade. Laura flinched as if he had physically struck her. Her betrayal was not a momentary lapse, a careless whisper. It was a calculated, long-term plan. She was not just a greedy wife. She was a predator waiting for her prey to weaken. Richard finally found his voice, a roar of pure rage. That's enough, you ungrateful little parasite. After everything we've done for you, letting you into this family, you dare come into this house, a house you can barely afford, and insult my wife, my son, and my daughter? He surged to his feet, his face puce with fury. You have nothing. You are nothing. I could crush you, you hear me? I could buy and sell you 100 times over. Liam didn't flinch. He remained seated, a small island of calm in the hurricane of Richard's rage. That's where you're wrong, Richard, he said, his voice still level. You think in terms of buying and selling. It's the only language you understand. So let's speak it. He gestured to the leather portfolio on the table. You are a man obsessed with a single project, the Azure Pinnacle. You've bet your entire company on it. You've boasted to anyone who will listen that you are on the verge of hiring the world's most celebrated and mysterious architect to design it, a man known only as Orion. Richard's eyes narrowed, suspicion warring with his anger. What does that have to do with anything? Everything, Liam said. He leaned forward, opened the portfolio, and drew out a single, large sheet of heavy paper. He spread it on the coffee table. It was a design, a breathtakingly detailed architectural rendering of a tower, a spiraling structure of glass and light that seemed to climb into the very heavens. It was a design of genius, of vision, a design that would not just scrape the sky, but dance with it. It was unmistakably the Azure Pinnacle, but rendered with a beauty and elegance that Richard's hired hacks could never have conceived. The Prestons stared at the drawing, mesmerized. It was the physical manifestation of Richard's wildest ambitions. My God, Richard breathed, his anger momentarily forgotten, replaced by a developer's awe. That's it. That's the vision. Where did you get this? Liam didn't answer. He simply reached into his jacket, produced the matte black fountain pen, and uncapped it. With a smooth, practiced motion, he leaned over the drawing. In the bottom right corner, in the box reserved for the architect, he signed his name. Not his full name, just a single, stylized symbol. A star. Orion. He straightened up and looked at Richard, whose eyes were fixed on the signature, his brain struggling to connect the impossible dots. He looked from the signature on the paper to the quiet, unassuming man in the armchair, from the mythical genius he had been chasing to the son-in-law he had been mocking. The gears of his mind ground to a halt, then spun in reverse with sickening speed. "No," Richard whispered, shaking his head. "No, it's not possible." "I am Orion," Liam said, the three words landing with the force of a wrecking ball. "Orion Design is my firm. I founded it 7 years ago. The anonymous owner of the land you've been trying to lowball for the past 6 months? That's me too. The shell company your lawyers have been sending insulting offers to is a subsidiary of my holding company." He let the information sink in. He watched the arrogance drain from Richard's face, replaced by a sickly, greenish pallor of utter disbelief and horror. The world as Richard Preston knew it, a world where he was the king, the titan, the master of the universe, had just been obliterated. The man he had dismissed as a tile picker was the very person who held his entire empire in the palm of his hand. Marcus was frozen, his mouth hanging open, his face a mask of slack-jawed incomprehension. Eleanor looked as if she were about to faint, her hand fluttering to her pearls. And Laura was staring at Liam as if seeing him for the first time. The man she had married, the man she had planned to fleece and discard, was not the simple, plodding architect she thought he was. He was a giant, a hidden king, and she had been dancing on his back, oblivious to the power stirring beneath her feet. The money she had been plotting to take, the modest sum she imagined, was a pittance, a rounding error in the face of the truth. The irony was so immense, so crushing, it stole the air from her lungs. "The azure pinnacle," Liam continued, his voice relentless, "was never going to be yours, Richard. I let the negotiations proceed as a social experiment, to see how far your hubris would take you, and you did not disappoint." He gestured around the room. "This house, which you so openly disdain, I paid for it in cash before I ever met Laura. This car your son finds so amusing, it's what I drive when I don't want to be noticed. My other car is a vintage Aston Martin, currently in a climate-controlled garage. The small inheritance Laura was so patiently waiting for is one of the largest private fortunes in the country, built not on concrete, but on innovation and intellect, concepts you wouldn't understand." He finally stood up, looking down at the wreckage of the family. "You wanted my money, Laura," he said, his voice now laced with a profound, weary sadness. "You schemed and you plotted for a few $100,000, maybe $1 million if you got lucky. And in doing so, you threw away a life of genuine partnership, of trust, and a share in a fortune beyond your wildest dreams. You traded a mountain of gold for a handful of dust." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a battlefield after the final shot has been fired. The silence of ruin. Richard sank back onto the sofa, his body deflating, all the bluster and rage gone, leaving only a hollowed-out old man. He looked at the drawing of the tower, the symbol of his ambition, now a monument to his humiliation. It was so close, and yet it had never been further away. Laura finally broke. A choked, desperate sob tore from her throat. It wasn't a cry of remorse, not yet. It was the sound of pure, unadulterated loss. The sound of a gambler who had just realized she'd folded on a royal flush. "Liam, please," she whispered, her voice ragged. She took a stumbling step toward him, her hands outstretched. I love you. I didn't mean it. I was just angry, confused. My family, they pressured me." The excuses tumbled out. a pathetic, frantic cascade of lies and half-truths. "We can fix this, please. I love you. It's you I love, not the money. I never cared about the money." Her words were ash in the air. He had heard her whisper her true heart's desire in the garden. He had seen the proof in her browser history. Her love was a currency she was now trying to spend to buy back a life of luxury, but her account was empty. "No, Laura," he said, his voice gentle but unbreakable. "You don't love me. You love what you thought I could give you. And when you decided it wasn't enough, you made a plan to take it. The only thing you're sorry for is that you underestimated the prize." At that moment, as if on cue, the doorbell rang again. Laura's head snapped toward the door, a wild, desperate hope in her eyes. A guest? A distraction? A reprieve? Liam, however, didn't even glance toward the door. "That will be for me," he said calmly. He walked to the door and opened it. Standing on the porch was a man in a perfectly tailored dark suit, holding a leather briefcase. It was Julian. He gave Liam a slight, respectful nod and stepped inside. He took in the scene, the shattered Prestons, the sobbing Laura, the architectural drawing on the table, with the dispassionate air of a forensic accountant surveying a financial crime scene. "Julian," Liam said, "thank you for coming." "Liam," Julian replied, his voice crisp. He opened his briefcase. "I have the documents you requested." He handed a thick envelope to Liam. Liam didn't open it. He walked over to Laura and held it out to her. She stared at it, her hand trembling as she took it. Her name was typed neatly on the front. "Those are divorce papers," Liam stated, his voice leaving no room for negotiation. "They are non-negotiable. The settlement is, well, there is no settlement. Our prenuptial agreement, the one your father's lawyers insisted on to protect you from me, is ironclad. It also, as it turns out, protects me from you. All premarital assets remain separate, and since all of my assets are premarital, you will be leaving this marriage with exactly what you brought into it. Nothing." He turned to Julian again, who produced a second document. Liam took it and placed it on the coffee table in front of Richard. "And this, Richard, is a formal notice. My company is rescinding all offers and negotiations related to the Azure Pinnacle property. Furthermore, as the primary lien holder on the loans you took out against the project, my holding company will be calling in that debt in 30 days. I believe the term is liquidity crisis." Richard stared at the paper as if it were a venomous snake. The final nail was being hammered into his corporate coffin, and the man holding the hammer was the same one he had planned to employ as a bathroom decorator. Poetic justice was a concept Richard Preston had never believed in. He was a firm believer now. "You can't," Richard croaked, his voice a dry rasp. "It will ruin me." "Yes," Liam said simply, "it will. You built your empire on arrogance and intimidation. You gambled everything on a project you felt entitled to. You lose." He looked around the room one last time, at the family that had taken him in, only to tear him down. At Eleanor, whose face was a mask of social terror, already calculating the fallout, the gossip, the humiliating slide from the top of the city's elite. At Marcus, who for the first time in his life looked small, his swagger gone, replaced by the dawning fear of a world where his father's name was no longer a shield. And at Laura, who was clutching the divorce papers to her chest, her body racked with silent, shuddering sobs of pure, devastating regret. "The house is mine, Laura," Liam said, his voice softening almost to a whisper. "I will give you 1 week to pack your things and leave. After that, you will be trespassing." He walked past them, past the ruins of their lives, and headed for the door. Julian fell into step beside him. Liam didn't look back. There was nothing left to see but the rubble of a life built on lies. As he stepped out into the crisp autumn air, he felt not triumph, but a vast, quiet emptiness. The demolition was complete. Now the difficult work of building again could begin. The month that followed was a quiet cataclysm for the Preston family. The shockwaves of that Saturday afternoon radiated outwards, shattering their carefully constructed world with brutal efficiency. As promised, Liam's holding company called in Richard's loans. The 30-day deadline was not a threat, it was a timetable. Richard, stripped of the Azure Pinnacle project that was his only hope for a massive influx of capital, scrambled. He tried to secure other lines of credit, but word travels fast in the world of high finance. The story of his public humiliation and the sudden, inexplicable collapse of his flagship project made him toxic. Lenders who had once clamored for his business now wouldn't return his calls. Preston Development, once a titan, began to crumble. It started with massive layoffs, then the selling off of assets, not at a profit, but at a loss, desperate sales to cover the crushing weight of his debt. The empire Richard had spent a lifetime building was being dismantled, piece by piece. Eleanor faced a different kind of ruin. Her world was not one of balance sheets, but of benefit committees and exclusive guest lists. The financial collapse was a disaster, but the social fallout was an extinction-level event. The story, though its exact details were known only to those in the room, leaked in whispers and rumors. The Prestons were suddenly pariahs. Invitations dried up. Friends of 30 years suddenly became very busy. At a charity auction she had once chaired, Eleanor found herself seated at a table in the back, near the kitchen. The quiet snubs, the averted gazes, the sudden silences when she approached a group. It was a death by 1,000 cuts for a woman whose entire identity was woven from the fabric of social acceptance. She retreated into the cavernous mansion, a prisoner in her own monument to status. Marcus, stripped of his father's wealth and influence, was cast adrift. The cushy, high-paying job at Preston Development vanished. He was forced to look for actual work, a humiliating endeavor for a man whose only real skill was spending his father's money. His resume was a testament to nepotism, and potential employers saw right through it. The sports car was repossessed. The high-end apartment was lost. He ended up moving back into his parents' now gloomy mansion, a 30-year-old man sleeping in his childhood bedroom. The bravado he had worn like armor, now replaced by a sullen, resentful silence. And Laura. Laura experienced the most profound and personal desolation. True to his word, Liam gave her 1 week. She spent it in a daze, wandering through the home that was no longer hers, surrounded by objects that represented a life she had catastrophically misjudged. She packed her designer clothes and expensive shoes into boxes, the act feeling like a funeral rite. She tried to talk to Liam, to plead with him. She left voicemails filled with tears, apologies, and frantic declarations of love. They went unanswered. She sent long, rambling emails, rewriting the history of their marriage, painting herself as a victim of her family's influence. They went unread. Liam had erected a wall of silence, as solid and impenetrable as any he had ever designed. On the final day, she stood on the porch with her suitcases, waiting for a taxi. The home looked exactly the same, but it felt alien to her. She had never truly seen it, she realized. She had only seen its modest size, its respectable but unexciting address. She had never appreciated the perfect flow of the rooms, the way the light fell through the windows Liam had so carefully placed, the sense of peace it held. She had been living inside a masterpiece without ever noticing the artistry. She moved into a small, sterile apartment her parents, in one of their last acts of financial solvency, had paid for. The silence was the worst part. It was a hollow, empty silence, filled with the ghosts of what she had thrown away. The sheer scale of her miscalculation was a constant, tormenting presence. She had played a high-stakes game with a man she thought was holding a pair of twos, only to discover he had the whole deck in his hands. Her greed hadn't just been immoral, it had been stupid. And for a woman who prided herself on her cleverness, that was perhaps the most painful realization of all. Liam, for his part, did not revel in their downfall. He took no pleasure in their suffering. He had acted not out of a desire for revenge, but from a need for consequence. It was a simple architectural principle. A structure built on a faulty foundation cannot be allowed to stand, for it will inevitably collapse and harm those within. He had simply hastened the process, a controlled demolition to prevent a more chaotic disaster. He threw himself into his work. The news that Liam Thorne, the quiet residential architect, was the true identity of the legendary Orion sent shockwaves through the industry. Offers poured in from all over the world. He turned most of them down. He had no interest in becoming a celebrity architect. He did, however, move forward with two projects. The first was the community library. He tore up his old, modest design and replaced it with a new one, a stunning, light-filled space with soaring ceilings and warm wood, a building that felt both grand and welcoming. He funded the entire project himself, a quiet gift to the town that had been his unassuming home. The second project was the Azure Pinnacle. He redesigned it slightly, making it even more elegant, more integrated with the city around it. It would not be a monument to one man's ego, but a contribution to the skyline, a piece of public art that also happened to be a functional building. His firm, Orion Design, began construction. It would be a symbol not of what Richard Preston had lost, but of what Liam was now free to build. He was clearing the site of his old life, preparing the ground for something new, something honest, something true. 6 months after that fateful Saturday, Liam stood on the observation deck of a skyscraper across the city. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. In the distance, the steel skeleton of the Azure Pinnacle was beginning to rise, a framework of future promise against the fading light. His phone buzzed. It was a text from Julian. "She signed the final papers today. It's officially over." Liam typed back a simple, "Thank you." He felt a sense of finality, a quiet closing of a painful chapter. He thought of Laura, not with anger anymore, but with a distant, clinical pity. He had heard through Julian that she had taken a job as a receptionist at a dental office, that her parents had been forced to sell their mansion and move into a much smaller, rented house. They were all living with the consequences of their choices, stripped of the status and wealth they had worshipped, forced to confront the hollowness of their own values. Redemption, Liam knew, was possible, but it required genuine change, a true reckoning with one's own character. It could not be bought or begged for. It had to be earned. Whether the Prestons would ever embark on that difficult journey was not his concern. He had severed the ties, not just legally, but emotionally. A cool breeze swept across the deck. He thought of the whisper in the garden, the words that had shattered his world. "His money will be mine soon." He had learned a hard lesson that day, that some people see others not as human beings, but as resources to be exploited. But he had also learned something about himself. He had learned that his quiet nature was not weakness, but strength, that his integrity was not a liability, but his most valuable asset, that true worth is not measured by the height of your buildings or the size of your bank account, but by the strength of your character and the truth you are willing to live by. He had been underestimated, and in being underestimated, he had found his power. He had faced betrayal and had not become bitter. He had faced arrogance and had not become cruel. He had maintained his dignity, his moral high ground, and had emerged not just intact, but stronger. The first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. He saw one, bright and clear, near the rising silhouette of his tower. Orion. He was no longer hiding behind the name. He was claiming it. He was an architect, a builder of beautiful things. And now, finally, he was free to build a life of his own design, on a foundation of his own making. A life of quiet strength, of honest work, and of peace. The storm had passed. The site was clear. Construction could begin. Thank you for staying with me through Liam's journey. It's a powerful reminder that true strength isn't always loud, and that integrity is a fortune that no one can take from you. What do you think is the most important lesson from this story? Was Liam's response justified, or could he have handled it differently? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every one. If you found value in this story, please give it a like and subscribe for more content that explores the complexities of human nature. Your support means the world. Until next time, be strong, be true, and never let anyone underestimate your worth.